Let's turn back to 1 Samuel 25. 1 Samuel 25, and it's really summed up, this chapter summed up in verse 3, which says, "Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved." What is true beauty? That's a question that the world usually answers by pointing to physical appearance. We measure beauty by how a person appears on the outside. But the Bible has a different answer. It couldn't be more different, because the Bible measures true beauty in terms of character, what's inside, and especially the beauty or the character of wisdom. Again and again in the Bible, we see folly contrasted with wisdom. Folly portrayed as ugly, and wisdom portrayed as beautiful. And that's what we have here in this verse. We have a contrast between Abigail and her husband, Nabal. The woman was discerning and beautiful. You see the combination of words there? Discerning, or wise, and beautiful. The man was harsh and badly behaved. And so, in this chapter, we really have a lived out example of the contrast between the fool and the wise, or the ugliness of folly and the beauty of wisdom. And therefore, as we look at this evening, it really does challenge us with this great question: am I wise, or am I foolish? Let's see if we can get to the right answer to that as we look at this chapter together. What this chapter brings before us, first of all, is receive God's gifts with gratitude, not greed. And Nabal was someone who received multiple gifts from God and yet was not grateful for them. He indeed just became greedier the more that he had. So we see here in verse 2, Nabal's blessings. We're told the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, probably a millionaire in our own way of reckoning it. An extremely wealthy man, an extremely blessed man. And yet, we're told of his folly here. In verse 11, after David's men had come to Nabal and asked for some supplies, given that they had protected Nabal's shepherds in the desert for many months, if not years, David would have expected some kind of charitable generosity when he came to Nabal and said, through his men, give us some supplies. But what was Nabal's answer? Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who come from I do not know where? We don't see grace, do we? We don't see gratitude. We don't see generosity. We see contempt. We see disdain. We see him despising those in need. Generosity opens the hand. Greed clenches the fist. And so here we're given this contrast. God's generosity, does it create in us a gratitude and a generosity? That's the wise path. Or does it just deepen our greed and possessiveness and pride? Secondly, we see here, respond to trouble with discernment, not panic. What happened when David's men came back from Nabal and reported to David Nabal's answer? David was incensed at the injustice, the unfairness, given all that he had done for Nabal and his employees, and decided he was going to slaughter them. Let's look through this just in a bit more detail. Abigail hears from Nabal's servants, her husband's servants, this guy has been a complete idiot. This worthless fellow, they call him, has gone and offended David, and now David is going to come and wipe us all out. Now, therefore, know this, and consider what you should do, they say to Abigail, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house. Because David had decided Nabal's execution was not enough. He was going to wipe out the whole house of Nabal. That's the danger. What about Abigail's response? Well, we're told she made haste. She acted quickly. There was no presumption. There was a real awareness of the terrible danger she and her whole household were in. And she took supplies that Nabal refused to give, and she gathered them together, 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already prepared. She gathered together more than enough for David's men in order to go with them to give what they needed. And she doesn't wait. She doesn't wait for David's men to come, and then there's no opportunity really, because they'll be so fired up that just the slaughter would take place. So she tells the young men, go on before me, I'm coming after you. And as she rode on the donkey, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. This is an incredibly courageous woman. David, angry David, with 400 angry armed men coming to slaughter Nabal's house. If you're Abigail, what are you doing? You're probably getting out of there as fast as you possibly can, but not her. This beautifully wise woman goes to confront the danger, wants to act as a go-between, as a mediator, as a stop-gap, as someone to stand in the gap and hold back this terrible danger. She goes towards the trouble. This shows us again how Abigail responded to danger with discernment, with wisdom, not panic. Then we see, thirdly, restrain destructive anger with gracious truth, not reactive anger. David's anger here was sinful. It was over the top. It was excessive. To be sinned against by Nabal, you would think, well, Nabal may be punished, but to execute his whole house, that's excessive. And so we see Abigail, in her great wisdom again, coming with gracious truth, which is contrasted with David's reactive anger. Let's again look at it in more detail. We see, first of all, humble intervention. In verse 24, she fell at his feet. She comes humbly, she comes bowing. And she says, "On me alone, my Lord, be the guilt." She says, "I'm going to take responsibility for this. Deal with me and not with Nabal. Please let your servant speak in your ears." She comes with truth. And she wants him to listen. And what does she tell him? She tells him, first of all, God is restraining you. The Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand by me coming to stop you and to reason with you. And it's fascinating how much Abigail emphasizes David's sin is, yes, his anger, but especially his taking matters into his own hand, trying to accomplish deliverance, trying to accomplish justice with his own hand. You see that, for example, in 1 Samuel 25. See if I can find this. You look at verse 31. She says to David, "My Lord, if you listen to me, if you don't go forward anymore, you will have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself." She sees here David, instead of leaving deliverance and justice in God's hand, is taking it into his own. In verse 26, we read, God is restraining you from blood guilt, from saving with your own hand. And then again in verse 33, so 3 places, David says to Abigail, "Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand." She got through. Her gracious words got through to David's soul, and got through to David in a way that really appealed to his own knowledge of God. She brings very practical theology to David. She's saying to David, "David, you know that salvation is of the Lord. You've sung about it. Look at all the psalms on it. Your only hope is that salvation is of the Lord. You personally, you know that the promises of God made to you about your future being king, that's all going to be fulfilled by the hand of the Lord. And therefore, in this situation, get your hands out of it. Leave it in God's hands." Here we see amazing wisdom. She is a deep and practical theologian. And then she appeals to David, "Remember your calling," in verse 28. She seems to know about the promises made to David, that he would be king of Israel, and that from him would come the Messiah. And she says to him, "The Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord." She's saying, David, the Lord is on your side. You are on the Lord's side. God has made you promises of a sure house, an everlasting kingdom. Remember that. Remember your calling. Remember God's role in your life. And then she says, think about tomorrow. So many good reasons she brings here to David. My Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience. If you listen to me, if you disarm, if you turn around, you're not going to have any regrets tomorrow. Your conscience will not be plagued by this excessive, angry reaction. You won't have a bad conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. So you see here her humble intervention. She's pointing David from himself to God. God's restraining you. Pointing David to God's promises, not David's resolve and will. He's made sure promises to you. He points David to his conscience and how he could live with himself if he follows his own will and not God's. And David recognizes God's grace coming to him through Abigail. Blessed be your discretion, your wisdom, your insight. And blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. You see how a soft voice can still deliver strong truth? That's a wise woman that we have here. And then fourthly, rely on God for justice, not personal revenge. That's true wisdom. Relying on God for justice, not personal revenge. When Abigail comes back from meeting with David and succeeds in turning him back from his mission, she comes, and what does she find him? He's utterly clueless. He has no idea how near he has come to his own death and causing the death of many, many more. And he's eating and drinking like a king. He's on the precipice of eternity. And yet, so foolish was he that he had no awareness whatsoever of his predicament, of the risks he was taking. He's having a party when he is in mortal danger. So God deals with Nabal himself, not David. When Abigail told Nabal the next day after he had sobered up about what had happened and how close he had come to being wiped out and all his house, his heart died within him. Seemed to have gone into some kind of coma, some state of unconsciousness, probably some sort of heart attack or a stroke or something like that. God's hand struck Nabal, and he became as a stone. And 10 days later, the Lord struck him again, and he died. Here is the end of the fool. From eating and drinking to dead as a stone. From living like a king to dead in the grave. From lifting himself up now to being cast down to hell. Thinking he was so great to now being in the lowest place of all. Vengeance says, God is too slow. Faith says, God's never late. He never is late. And David understands the lesson. Blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. You see the great contrast? So, what is true beauty? True beauty is wisdom made visible. True beauty is wisdom made visible in the way we receive respond, restrain, and rely. In the way we receive God's gifts, in the way we respond to trouble, danger, trial, in the way we restrain anger and sin, and the way we rely on God for justice. Nabal had none of this. Abigail had all of this. She received God's gifts with gratitude and generosity. She responded to danger with discernment, wisdom, and urgency. She restrained David's foolish anger with words, gracious words of grace. And she persuaded David to rely on the Lord for justice, not take it into his own hands. And so wisdom here is characterized by gratitude, not greed, discernment, not panic, gracious words rather than inflammatory words, and resting and trusting rather than taking vengeance. Do you see true beauty? Do you see how beautiful this God-given wisdom is? And it didn't come naturally from Abigail. It's clear she was a godly woman. She had been taught of God. She knew about David and God's plan for David and David's kingdom. She trusted in God. How hard it must have been to live in a marriage like that. And yet, she was a living witness to Nabal. She prayed for him. She stood in the gap. She kept him from folly as much as she could. And how hard it was. What side do you find yourself on as this contrast is brought before you this evening? Are you on the side of ugly folly or beautiful wisdom? Is your name Nabal, meaning fool, or Abigail, which means the Father's delight? Are you taking God's gifts as though you are the owner? Or are you taking God's gifts as though a steward, a manager of all that he owns? Are you hoarding like the fool or sharing like the wise? Are you saying, "Who is David?" Or are you honoring God's anointed king? Do you recognize the Son of David? Or do you say, "I want nothing to do with this man, no matter how much he has done for me"? Do you return evil for good, as Nabal did? Or good for evil, as David ultimately did? Do you invite bloodshed, as Nabal did, or prevent bloodshed, as Abigail did? Do you speak impulsively like Nabal, or graciously like Abigail? Do you confront crises with wisdom, or do you make crises, or do you try to diffuse them? Do you elevate yourself like a king, or do you humble yourself like a servant, Abigail? Is your heart as hard as a stone like Nabal's, or is it soft and responsive as David's was? Is your story going to end in judgment and disgrace? Or, as Abigail, welcomed into the family and the house of the king? These are the only two ways to live. These are the only two characters that God sees for all the diversity that is found amongst the human race. No two alike, yet there are only two fundamental characters. There is the foolish and there is the wise. There is the ugly and there is the beautiful. This is what God sees as he looks down. He's saying, are you Nabal or are you Abigail? And he puts a story like this in the Bible to persuade us away from being a Nabal and towards being an Abigail. He puts this in the Bible to help us see this stark contrast, to eliminate any idea of there being some kind of middle way or some way of keeping a foot in each camp. Are you wise or are you foolish? Jesus himself, as he came to this world, we read it in our call to worship, separated the whole human race into the wise and the foolish, didn't he? The foolish who built his house in the sand and it fell, and great was the fall of it. The wise who built his house on the rock and it stood firm. Jesus himself comes and really presents to us the perfection of wisdom. Abigail perfected. The truly wise one who longs to make us wise. The truly wise one who comes with wisdom, who came to show again the ugliness of folly and the beauty of wisdom, who came to change Nabal's into Abigail's, who, though the owner of all things, came to share all things with his people, who came as the David to be honored, not insulted, who came as someone not to shed blood of others, but to shed his own blood for others. He came like Abigail to reason with the unreasonable and to bring us over to the side of reason. As the prophet Isaiah says, "Come, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they can be as white as snow." He came and spoke not impulsively, but thoughtfully. He came as an exalted king and yet was willing to be a servant for the good of others. He came and wisely stood in the gap to shield those who were foolishly endangering themselves and others from God's wrath and to bring them into a place of safety. He came to take hearts of stone and turn them into hearts of flesh. He came to change the ending of your story from one of judgment and disgrace to one of salvation and being welcomed into the house of the King. Who can read this story and not come to that point of just say, "Lord, make me wise. If I am a fool still, if I'm still a Nabal, if I still get that character, spiritual folly, I could have all the wisdom of the world. I could be very wise in terms of my career and calling and other interests, but spiritually, I've not been wise. Spiritually, I've been foolish. Spiritually, I've not built my house on the rock, but on the sand." I don't want to live like Nabal. I don't want to die like Nabal. I want to be an Abigail. I want to be made wise unto salvation. Come and make me wise. And if you are, by God's grace, made wise, as Abigail was, ask for even more wisdom. We're told, if anyone lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously, without reproach, and it shall be given you. It's here waiting for you, spiritual wisdom, spiritual discernment, spiritual insight, true beauty. And so, we have this beautiful wisdom receives with gratitude, responds with discernment, restrains with gracious truth, and relies on God for justice. Let's pray.